the modern affluent society sort of can have just what it wants. It's got some idea that the old cars, this feeling that the old cars, they say they're not made like they used to be. And I can honestly say that, in all fairness, there's nothing so good as a modern motor car. I mean, some of the old cars were good, they were excellent, they had a charm of their own, but there's nothing like the modern motor car.
Like furniture design and architecture, the shape of the motor car pinpoints its place in history exactly. For many people, owning or restoring a classic car is to possess a time capsule of a bygone era or cherished memory. Amongst the rotting Austins, Cortinas, Anglias and Morrises in Bob Wilkinson's breaker's yard are the cultural cues of Britain's recent history, from the austerity of post-war rationing to the sexual liberation of the 60s. You leave me. If cars are the archaeological relics of the era they came from, then Bob Wilkinson is the curator of a museum of rust.
Most of these things are preserved in here because they're rare. This is a Humber Pullman, quite a rare one, and several Rover engines. We've just recently supplied one of the blocks of this type to a customer in America. Cylinder block and crankshaft.
Bob is a font of knowledge for any car produced between 1930 and 1975.
It's a type that's been brought in quite recently. It's been lying out of doors for many years, but it's got a type of crankshaft in it that is very prone to breaking. Some particular makes, there's a constant demand for a particular type of part, and we try to preserve those.
These oily, mass-produced parts are gold dust.
Here, a lot of... This is quite a popular shelf here. We always have people here, the vintage racing people looking for particular parts of our old SU carburetors. These are greatly needed. They look after anything to do with SU carburetors. They're very much in demand. And as you see on the floor, you've gone back the gear wheels. For instance, take a part like this is what they call a lay shaft cluster gear. They're prone to shedding odd teeth if people are very rough. Then we look for the general wear on it. If it's not worn through the case hardening, it's as good as new, a part like this. It would cost a king's ransom to have one made, and therefore we have to look after all these sort of parts. They're very valuable. This one's from immediate post-war Austin, one of the A40 Devon or Somerset types. Very popular car in its day.
The popular cars of yesterday become the popular classics of today, lovingly preserved in drafty garages in almost every corner of suburban Britain. For the last 5 years, Dave Marson's evenings and weekends have been devoted to restoring this Mk2 Cortina 1600E to the condition it was in when it left the Ford factory at Dagenham in 1970. The Mk2 Cortinas were an important turning point for Ford in Britain. The car was the first model to shake off the American design influences imposed by the parent company.
Put your foot down and demand performance. You'll get it in Ford Cortina. Still another way.
The 1600E was pitched at a market segment of young, sporty executives with families.
It was a car that was putting a niche in the market, if you like, between the Lotus Cortina and the GT. It's sort of a cross between the two, whereas you got quite a fast car in the Lotus Cortina. It was a harsh ride and there was no creature comforts really. And your GT was sort of a lower market again, so they pitched this in between, sort of at an executive market, if you like, with a bit of plush trim and whatever, sports wheels, but with the Lotus suspension. So you got a nice sporty sort of ride without the hassle of a Lotus engine, which tended to be a bit of a problem, and it was quite successful. When I first started motoring, you bought a car, a second-hand car, First thing you did was change the wheels. You put a flash set of wheels on it because you only ever got standard wheels in those days. You'd put spotlights on, reversing lights, wing mirrors and all this sort of stuff. When the 1600E came out, it'd already got it all. You know, so to me, there was everything in that car that I needed, that I wanted. It was quick, it got good road holding, and it looked very nice on the road. So that was it for me.
Dave's years of work have produced a car worth far more than its market value. But money hasn't got a great deal to do with it. Dave is happy in the knowledge that he owns one of the best 1600Es in existence and a shelf full of concourse competition trophies.
A concourse car is as, but no better than, it left the factory. This is as spot on as you're ever going to get one of these, I think. Absolutely everything. It's got to be as Ford would have done it. You could have walked into a showroom 20 years ago and bought a car exactly like this one. Except it took me 5 years, where it probably takes Ford a couple of hours to build them.
This is the Ford Anglia 105E. It was designed by a British team, but overseen by the American Elwood Engel. This amazing launch film, directed by Joseph Losey, kick-started massive sales of the car. In 1991, they're building them again, by hand. Once the supply of vital panels has dried up, it's companies like Classic Components of Keighley, Yorkshire, that must save the day. Here, 9 skilled men made redundant from Britain's declining engineering industries help to keep parts of our motoring heritage alive. This is an Anglia's back valance panel. After appeals from its members, the Owners Club has ordered a batch of 25. Classic Components Managing Director, Jeff Coates.
We take the flat sheet and put it in the press tool and give it the first pressing, which does put some shape into it. We've got to take the edges off. It usually wrinkles round the edges. We've got to trim the edges off, which leaves you with something like that. We've got to work it by hand, fold the edges over, trim it off, cut the holes in, and we end up with a finished panel, which is more or less the same as the original. It was a matter of minutes in the factory down at Dagenham to press one of these. It takes us maybe from start to finish, including the tooling time, about an hour to make one.
At an average speed of almost 84 miles per hour, Jim Clark in a Cortina wins outright and takes a first in class.
Jeff Coates also specialises in restoring one of the instant classics of the 1960s, the Mark I Lotus Cortina.
We've got to cut out all the bad panels on the car. They've usually been welded up quite a lot in the past to get them through an MOT. We've got to cut all the rust and rot out of them. This has been done down this side. Everything's cut back to the good metal, and the panels are cut to fit and butt welded in and ground off, and you get as original as you possibly can.
For Bob Wilkinson, parts that are as good as new are good enough.
To get people that come and spend several days in looking round. They get great deal of pleasure from rooting around and having a good look at the old remains of the old cars.
Rooting around the rusty remains and congealed oil of a scrapyard is one of the escapist pleasures of the classic car buff. Somewhere amongst this lot, where the great rivals of the motor industry lie side by side in silent decay, are the missing links to hundreds of weekend restoration projects that will bring the past alive.
Oh yes, this is an interesting old car. It was an Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire. They were not very numerous, but they were a car that sort of vied with the Jaguar in the day, a copy of the Jag in some respects, and it's in the present moment being dismantled by some chaps from London who are going to come down and finish and take the engine and the gearbox and the back axle off it. They've already been and taken quite a few valuable bits off it. And it is now waiting. It is paid for. It's just waiting for them to come. I'm looking after its custodian. They come and take it when they can.
The people that we sell parts to, it's people that owned the cars quite a few years ago and they would like to run one again. I think there's a lot of nostalgia involved in it.
Today's cars are designed by a computer. The manufacturers now put all the information into a computer and the computer tells them what to make. Whereas years ago, a little guy with a pencil would draw on his piece of paper and that's what they would make. More personal, more of a personal design, if you like. Which I think would go down well today, probably, with a lot of motoring public. To throw the computer out the window and give a guy a pencil and a piece of paper and say, there you are, now draw me a car.
I saw one at a car show and I just thought, wow, that's beautiful. I thought it was actually American, first of all. And then I looked closer and saw that it wasn't. It's, you know, it's quite a bit smaller than an American car, but on its own it looks very big. And it was just the style. I just like the, I quite like the 40s car style rather than big fins and chrome. I mean, some of the later 50s cars are so over the top, it's ridiculous. But I like the sort of style, flowing lines.
For 20-year-old Rachel Crease, the 50s present a more attractive decade in which to exist than the 1990s. Her Vauxhall Wyvern is a vital part of a total 1950s lifestyle package. The Wyvern E-Series, launched at the Earl's Court Motor Show in 1951, was a departure from the more staid post-war utility of the Vauxhall L-Series.
The E-Series was completely different. It was a completely different body shell. They introduced monocoque construction. I think it was around the era of the E-Series. The style, the body style was just completely different. Here, the E-Series was very smooth and lower slung than the L-Series. The L-Series was very sit up and beg like a Pop or a Pilot, a Ford Pilot. When they introduced the E-Series, it was quite a big thing at Earl's Court in 1951 at the motor show. They did drawings of the stand, and the E-Series had a side-lifting bonnet, which was quite unusual. You could open the bonnet either side or completely take it off, so it made easy access to the engine compartment, and it shows the dash and the seats inside, how many people you could fit in, the luggage space, engines, and it had independent front suspension. It was quite an impressive model for when it was made. Well, the car was influenced by the Americans, by a lot of the American late 40s cars, such as Plymouths or Chevys, especially in 1948 Chevy. They have the same bar grille and the bull-nosed bonnet, and sort of that American style.
I'm going on a rocket ship to the moon. I hope that you will come and see me soon. I'm going far, far away.
Rachel belongs to a community of young people in love with the 50s, most of whom weren't born until the 1970s.
By the light of the moon, and shooting stars.
Theirs is an idealized view of post-war Britain, where in reality the only glamour to be found was in American movies and music.
In the night,
Flo McEwen's band, the Jive Cats, write and play 50s rockabilly music. It's the perfect soundtrack to the fashion, the lifestyle, and the cars.
This is a Singer Gazelle. This particular one is a Series 3A. It was produced in 1959. I call her Maybelline. They had a number of different series and they've all slightly changed. This particular one is a twin carb. And as I said, it was made in 1959. They built the Series 3A right up to 1961, and then continued with the Series B and the Series C. They're all very similar, but they actually stopped production, I believe, in the mid-60s. Gets you noticed. I certainly get let out of junctions quite well in this car. No problems there. If I break down, everybody rushes to help me. You try doing that in a modern car.
Flo's Singer Gazelle was produced by the Roots Group, a forgotten British motor manufacturer consumed by the multinational Chrysler Corporation in the 60s.
You can imagine the British cars with very dull, dark colours. This one is obviously much more pastel coloured, more American, summer, sunshine, the whole effect.
Rocket ship to the moon. I hope that you will come and see me soon. I hope that you will come and see me soon.
The late 50s spawned a whole era of wannabe American cars, imitating the flashy cruisers that populated the imported films and television programs of the time. Soon, many of the cars on Britain's roads reflected this invasion of American culture.
The new Zephyr.
This Mk2 Ford Zephyr is a perfect time capsule of the period. Motoring journalist Liz Turner.
It's a family car, but what it's about is optimism and looking forward to a bright new technological future. Cars are always a barometer of the mood of the times, and after the war the Americans had a huge boom. Their cars got incredibly long, 20-foot long, covered in chrome. They're the most amazing technicolours. In Britain we took a long time to recover, so our cars stayed a bit smaller and a bit duller for a while. But this car came out in 1958, and by that time skirts were full, people wore hats, rationing was finishing, and people wanted a brighter, sharper car. So the cars very much follow the American styling. They've got plenty of chrome all over them that you can polish on a Sunday, two-tone upholstery. They offered a bit of luxury for the first time in a very long time.
In the 50s, a new car was a rare sight. Even so, up to 1962, Ford sold over 220,000 Mark II Zephyrs. One of the Zephyr's rivals was the Vauxhall Cresta PA. Like the Ford, the Crestas owed more to Detroit than Dagenham or Luton.
The Vauxhall cars were known for their very lively colour schemes. You could get all sorts of things like leather or elastofab or PVC in pink and burgundy, or tartan if you wanted it. This is a little more sedate, subdued. It's vinyl on the dash and leather on the seat in two-tone. They've got this terrific 50s styling with the sharp points and the fins and the chrome. They're fun to have, particularly for the young people who like the 50s music and who dress in the 50s styles. It's nice to arrive in a car that actually matches your style. I mean, if you look like James Dean and get out of a Nissan Micra, it doesn't have the same effect at all. You're both sitting on the same seat. You can drive along with your arm around the one you love. I remember doing that when I was younger. The boyfriend, I was changing gear and he was steering. I think it was a sexier age. You could cuddle up in the cars, and in America there's always that idea of going to a drive-in movie. But I think we may have an idealised view of the 50s. I don't think it was actually like that for young people at the time. But I think it was an exciting time. And I think there are a lot of things to look forward to in the 50s.
Now, here it is. The new Ford Capri.
One of the things to look forward to in the 50s was the swinging 60s.
Be our guest.
The Ford Capri, launched in 1969 with its hedonistic marketing campaign, was the last of the American clones, taking its fastback coupe styling from the Ford Mustang.
A fantastic-looking fastback with room for four at a price you can afford.
A lot of people have owned Ford, and a lot of people have owned Ford Capris. In fact, the majority of people who speak to say, yes, I've had one of those. I've put one through a hedge.
Go ahead. Dream some more. The new Ford Capri is very generous with its room and comfort.
The whole concept of the car is very glamorous, and that's what appeals to people. Now, it's an affordable glamour car, because if you couldn't afford all that performance, you opted for a 1.3 or a 1.6, so you had a very economical sports car. If you could afford the top of the range, which was this 3000E, then you went for the 3 litre, and you had all the extras and options, so you could really build a car that you wanted.
You can choose from 5 engines. Turn Capri into a top-of-the-line GT that can go from 0 to 100 in 11 seconds. You can have all the GT accessories, manual or automatic transmission. The works.
And that concept went right through to the Mark III. So you could either buy a 4-cylinder, which would be the laser, or you could opt for the V6 2.8 injection. So you've got an affordable classic car. But the shape is still there, whether it's a 1969 or a 1987 Capri.
With the 152 different model variants that Ford provided, the Capri offers an endless restoration treasure hunt for exactly the right parts and trim. This is John Hill's graveyard of Capris, kept solely for reference purposes.
The appeal is the challenge. You've got a challenge. It's a giant jigsaw puzzle. Each piece has to be put in logically, and each piece has to be restored. And there's pieces missing, and there's pieces that are wrong, and it can go together in the wrong order, so you have to undo it. It's a grown-up jigsaw. It's a giant Meccano set for somebody to put together, and it tests all your skills. You've got the bodywork skill, you've got spraying, you've got to be an electrician, you've got to be a mechanic, you know, you've got to be a trimmer. You've got to learn all these skills, and if you've got these skills, you're testing them to the full to rebuild that car. It's more difficult to rebuild a car than it would be to assemble a car from brand new parts.
Strangely enough, it is these cars, the ordinary family runabouts, mass-produced before traffic became a problem, that are now some of the most collectible classic cars.
As I ride around the premises, I see the odds and ends of ideas that I was going to do, and now I've realised that I shan't have time to do what I wanted to. But I don't know. I'm going to try, and I hope that I'll live long enough to clear it up and tidy the loose ends up, and leave all the valuable items in the other premises which you've seen, where they can be sold or disposed of by members of my family. And it would be a shame to throw everything out for scrap after I've spent so many years looking after it and saving it.
Next Sunday at 8, in the last programme of the series, collectors can find out which of today's motoring classics would be worth shrink-wrapping for posterity.
Don't leave me halfway to paradise. So near, yet so far away. Whoa, 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 so near, yet so far.